Ladies and gentlemen, to give a report, which is a major part of today's event, may we have a representative of Kantar.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right, good afternoon to you also. My name is Akin Afere. I'm an associate director at Kantar. With me this afternoon, so when you have questions, you know who to direct it to. Is the country executive for Nigeria and Ghana, Eddington Danda, as well as the client director for the market as well, Akosia Achu. They are joining us this afternoon, for this event. I want to say thank you to Advan and its executive for our ongoing thought leadership partnership and the opportunity to present the rather interesting thought leadership piece to you this afternoon. I think I have about 15 minutes, so don't seize the volume until I am done. I will make sure that I'm done in good time. Can I have the first slide? Okay, so I will speak briefly about the state of play, and then I'll go into the thought leadership next. Now, the state of the Nigerian business terrain is not new to anyone here, right? We've been going through, I like to refer to it as a time of flex. A time of flex, rather than say difficult and challenging times, right? In the past 18 months plus. And what has been happening in the space is impacting big time on consumer confidence. Right, one of the major metrics that people track is inflation. Now, we noticed a dip in July, obviously, but there's been a turnaround since August or thereabout. As at the end of October, inflation was at 33.8%. It's on the rise again. Consumer confidence, which we track consistently, is at 52%. Now, that seems high because they're above 50. But when you consider the fact that just four years ago, it was at 79%, and you've been witnessing a downturn consistently. However, we do believe that there's still growth to be found in the market. Now, one of the metrics that you look at is GDP growth. GDP growth as at the end of Q3 was at 3.4% versus 3.19 in Q2 versus 2.98 in Q1. You also consider a sector like finance, and you look at the contribution of financial institutions to GDP. As at end of Q2, it had increased by 88.7%. So there is growth, right? Next slide. Now, if I were to ask all of you here how your consumers are reacting to the situation that we've seen, you will most likely say one of these four things, which we've been tracking. You will most likely say, for example, that they are rationalizing quantity and frequency of use because resources are scarce. So you have to balance what you have, right? You most likely say that. We call that a squeeze strategy. Or you will say that they are prioritizing goods and alternative goods and services. So you look at what is key and you prioritize that. And and spend the scarce resources you have making sure that the priority things are handled. And if there's extra left, then you deal with other things. We call that a swap mentality. Or you find that people are switching to cheaper alternatives, because affordability is key. When you have scarce resources, affordability becomes a strategic imperative. It's what you can afford that you spend funds on. And so we call that the switch. Or people are scrambling entirely. You look at a category or you look at a service and you determine it is not core to my business. So you stand it down until there's a revenue cycle. So you find that consumers and customers are adapting in one of these four ways. Next slide. But this is a truth that we are all confounded with, that it is difficult to unlock growth during inflationary times. And this is not something that is peculiar to Nigeria. Because when you think about it really, the entire globe is going through a certain inflationary time. And growth becomes a strategic imperative. It becomes a bit more difficult. And that's the question that we asked ourselves at Kantar. How can businesses, brands, unlock growth, especially in inflationary times? And this was a global question. So what did we do? Next slide. That question gave rise to what we call the blueprint for brand growth, which I want to just share with you briefly this afternoon. Next slide. So what we did was we took 5.4 billion attitudinal data points across 21,000 brands. This is a global study, right, including Nigeria and other countries in Africa. 540 categories across 54 markets. We also looked at 1.1 billion purchase data points, attitudinal data, layered that on purchase data points across 20,000 brands, 100 categories, 25 markets. over a 10-year period. And we layered that on our meaningful difference salient intellectual property to arrive at a key statement. Next. And this is what we arrived at. That brands grow by being more meaningfully different to more people. Now think about this for a second, as brand managers and CMOs here for FMCGs or services. When you want your brand to grow, the first thing you start to think about is penetration, right? And by penetration, you want to ensure that more people are attracted or are using your brand. And a key part of penetration is that your brand must become meaningful. By meaningful, will mean it must meet the need of your consumer, and they must build affinity for it. So that makes the brand meaningful for them. It must also be different, which means it must be seen as unique in that space and sort of dynamic. So when you combine that, the brand is meaningfully different, and then that drives penetration. And you have to be meaningfully different to more people for your brand to grow. Are you following me? Right? So that was the conclusion we came to, that this is a growth, what you refer to as a growth driver, especially in inflationary times. Now, as a CMO or a brand manager or a marketer, how do you, I like to use the word weaponize this growth driver in a way that your brands can grow? We identify 3 growth accelerators. One is that you need to predispose more people. I will explain that shortly. You need to be present, and you need to find new space. And of course, all of that is undergirded by behaviors. You must be consistent, like in any strategy you deploy. You must be connected totally, and then you must optimize your processes. Next slide. So let's start with this. What do we mean by brands grow by being more meaningfully different to more people? It's a simple premise. Next. Now, first of all, you must understand, as a person who is a brand custodian in this place, how meaningfully different your brand is. And I explained that a brand is meaningful if it meets the needs of its consumers, and they build an affinity towards it. So you say that that brand is meaningful. There's an emotional connection. And then you say a brand is different if it stands out of the crowd in its category. It's seen as unique, it's seen as dynamic. So you must understand clearly, as a person who is a brand custodian, how meaningfully different your brand is. And when you do that, you are able to identify how to drive stronger functional, because the brand must be functional. It must do what it says it will do, right? And emotive connections, and define strategic opportunities so that that brand can build difference. Unless, of course, your brand is a monopoly. That's a different case entirely. Most of us operate in sectors with competitors, so your brand has to stand out. That's what difference is all about. Now, this study showed that if a brand is meaningfully different, right, that brands that are meaningfully different command 5 times more penetration today in real advantage and in penetration over the next 2 years when compared to other brands in the study, if it is meaningfully different, right? Next slide. So if you want to build a brand that is meaningfully different, what should you consider as a CMO and a brand manager? 5 things here. First, you must factor difference into your positioning, your brand positioning and strategy. I explained simply what difference is. Difference is to be seen as unique and dynamic in your category. That must be a key premise in your brand positioning strategies. Secondly, you must use meaningful difference to convince the key decision holders to continue to invest in the brand. That becomes a challenge, especially in inflationary times, right? So you must be able to convince the key decision makers to continue to invest in the brand. I wish I had more time to talk about brand investment, but I don't. Hopefully, if we can have a chat after, we can talk about that. Number 3, you must measure and optimize your sources of different and degree of difference. You must have a holistic view of difference and distinctiveness, and you must consistently think strategically. Okay, next slide. All right, so let's look at the growth accelerators briefly. The first one, like I said, if a brand is going to be more meaningfully different to more people, it must predispose more people. Next slide. Next. Right, stay here until I say next. Now, what do we mean by predispose more people? Simple. You must increase your probability of purchase or access of your service by strengthening the predisposition of everyone towards your brand or their affinity to your brand. You must increase it, right? That means that you must invest in exposures and experiences that build the right predisposition. You must invest in it. It doesn't come by chance. It's deliberate and strategic. You must invest in it to make your brands mentally available and meaningfully different to more people. Mentally available, for example, if I mention certain sectors or certain categories, there are certain brands that come to your mind. It's a limited, your mind has a limited real estate. So every brand strives to ensure that they're in that real estate for that category, right? Yeah, that's what it means to make your brand more mentally available so that you enter into that mind space. Right. This study showed that brands that are strongly predisposed to people have 9 times more volume share, 4 times the likelihood to grow value share, and 2 times, they can charge 2 times a higher brand premium than brands that have a weaker predisposition. And what should you consider if you are striving to make your brand predispose more people? Next slide. Now, if you want your brand to predispose more people, there are 5 things to consider as well. First, understand and build predisposition. It happens deliberately. Secondly, create a tailwind for future growth. Thirdly, manifest your brand's meaningful difference. Remember we said that you should understand what makes your brand meaningful difference. Then you need to weaponize that as a tool that helps you grow your brand, right? Thirdly, master the what and the where of quality creative. And then create a feedback loop between customer expectation and the customer experience so that they feed into each other and you are building that up. Next slide. So the second growth accelerator is to be more present. Next. Be more present. Next slide, please. Now, to be more present, it means that you need to optimize marketing investment. This is something we understand very much here. But you need to optimize it in your consumer journey, your customer journey, in terms of the range of your portfolio, in terms of distribution, in terms of pack, in terms of pricing, promotions, and any other activity that helps you convert consumer predisposition, which is what we talked about, to capturing choice from consumers of other brands, right? Now, and the study shows that brands that are always present attract 7 times more buyers compared to those who are present in just 1/2 of buying occasions. Now, for those, look at your category, for example, and try to map out every buying occasion in that category. Where are you present? That's what we are talking about. You must be present where the decision is being made. Next slide. Now, what are the things that you need to consider if you want to be more present? 5 things. I said this just now, and I'm going to reiterate. Your brand must be found or must be present where decisions are being made. I'll say that again because it's very important. If you are going to be more present in your market or in your category, your brand must be present where the decisions are being made. Number 2, you must have a consumer-centric range and portfolio, right? Number 3, you must be visible. This is typically where we all stay. We stay there. But being present is a lot more than just being visible. But it's also key because people cannot let me take that again. People cannot be predisposed to a brand that they don't know about or have not seen. So being visible is important. And thirdly, you must get the price right, especially in inflationary times. Remember I said affordability is now a strategic imperative. So you must balance price, right, with what the equity of your brand says that you can charge. And 5th, you must make it easy to complete the sale. Just like people cannot predispose themselves to a brand they cannot see, people cannot buy or use a service they cannot find. Right? So even if I've seen it, when I decide to buy it or access it, I must be able to find it. It's our job as brand custodians to make that easy for the consumers. Next slide. Next. All right. Now, the final growth accelerator is to find new space. Next. What this means is that as brand managers and custodians, you must find the most incremental space. It may be consumer motivations. It may be consumer occasions. It may be new categories. It may be support services. But you must find incremental spaces that you can stretch in or stretch into if you are going to pursue growth, right? And you must make sure that once you stretch into those spaces or those motivations or those occasions, that you win in these spaces by meaningfully different innovation. Your innovation must stand out, as it were. Expanded distribution, of course, because you're expanding into a new space. So distribution must match it. And of course, communication that matches that as well. Now, consider this for a second, that the chance of growth, if you can just find new uses for your present range, is 2 times. Just find new uses for your present product range is 2 times. Also consider that if you can just increase the use of your brand by 10%, the data shows that there's a 17% corresponding growth. Just increase the use of your brand by 10%. The data shows that there's 17% corresponding growth that comes from that. Now, if you are going to find new space, you need to consider the following things. Next slide. The first thing that matters here is that you must challenge the business you think you are in. Because if you want to find new space in that category, it means you must redefine what the category is so that you can see where the new spaces are, where the white space are, like some people refer to it. Secondly, your find new space strategy will depend partly on your brand side. Let me explain that. We found that big brands usually find new space in one of 2 ways. A big brand is in a position to convince new users into a category because they are big. They can predispose new people who have never patronized that category before into it because of their size and their visibility. And they can also stretch more easily into new categories. That's why, for example, it's always easier for new brands to give you a new variant of something, for example, or to provide a sort of ancillary service. Small brands, on the other hand, because they are more nimble and more innovative, often find new space by converting existing users in a category. And I'm sure you've seen that. Existing users in a category to try out their brand. So they expand that way. That's why you need to realize that the size of the brand determines, to a large extent, the kind of strategy you deploy. A small brand cannot play like a new brand. The strategies differ. Right. Number 3, ensure that whatever stretch opportunities that you are pursuing is both appropriate for your brand and authentic for the brand as well. I'm sure you've seen some brands that have tried to stretch, and you already know this won't work because it's not authentic to the ethos of the brand. Has anybody seen that? Yeah, so you must ensure authenticity and appropriateness. And 4th, innovation, of course, is fundamental into new space. If you identify the space, the next thing is how do we stretch into this place innovatively? And then 5th, you must take an inside-out approach. Inside being looking through the business itself, outside being taking the consumer into consideration. In recap, the growth accelerator for finding new space, especially in inflationary times, is that you must make your brand more meaningfully different to more people. That's the growth driver. And that growth driver is driven by the 3 accelerators I just talked about. You must predispose more people. You must be more present. It's not an option. And then you must be able to find new space. Thank you for listening. We hope that this is beneficial to you. And it is our work, our role to help you shape the future of your brands, right? Especially as you're going into 2025 and you start to think about these things. We can take a few questions, I believe.
Kantar, I must say that was an incredible report. Absolutely report and detailed. A round of applause for him one more time. I'm sure we can do better. He really touched the pressure points. You did.